Hello, how are you today? And are you ready to hear mysteries? If you're ready, I'll tell you.
The haunted military camp. In the southern United States, there lies a military camp with a legend that has been passed down since World War II. This camp was once a crucial military base, and many soldiers gave their lives for their country. However, it is said that some of these soldiers never truly left. One winter night, the camp was eerily quiet. A new soldier named Jack had just been stationed there. Jack was a good soldier and never believed in ghosts or supernatural events. But that night he was assigned to guard duty alone. At midnight, Jack heard strange noises coming from the armory. It sounded like metal clashing and indistinct whispers. He decided to investigate, but found nothing. Jack tried to convince himself that the noises came from animals or natural causes. As Jack was about to return to his post, he felt a cold breeze from behind. When he turned around, he saw a shadowy figure of a soldier standing in the darkness. Jack called out, "Who's there?" but received no response. The shadow moved closer, and Jack felt an icy chill envelop his body. He decided to run back to his post. He told his fellow soldiers what had happened, but no one believed him. They said he was probably just tired and imagining things. The next night, Jack was on guard duty again. This time, he brought a tape recorder, hoping to capture the strange noises he had heard before. At midnight, the strange noises returned. Jack turned on the recorder and followed the sounds to the armory. He saw the shadowy figure again, clearer this time and moving distinctly. Jack tried to speak to it, but still there was no response. Jack decided to follow the shadow. It led him to an old, sealed-off room. Inside, Jack found an old journal belonging to a soldier named John, who'd served at the camp. The journal detailed John's battles and his death on the battlefield. John's body had never been recovered. Jack told his commanding officer about what he had found. The next day, they researched the history of the soldier named John and discovered that his body was indeed buried somewhere in the camp, unrecognized and unhonored. Once John's remains were properly honored and given a respectful burial, the strange occurrences at the camp ceased. Those who served there felt they had restored peace to a fallen soldier. Jack and John's story became a legend told and retold within the camp. The Phantom Soldier, Fort Hallow. In the heart of a dense forest in the southern United States, there lies an abandoned military fort known as Fort Hallow. The fort, once bustling with soldiers during the Civil War, now stands silent and decaying. However, locals whisper about the ghostly presence of a soldier who roams the grounds at night. One evening, a young military historian named Mark decided to visit Fort Hallow. He had heard the stories and wanted to investigate them for his research. Armed with a flashlight and a digital recorder, Mark ventured into the fort just as the sun began to set. As darkness fell, the air grew colder. Mark explored the dilapidated barracks, the old mess hall, and the crumbling watchtowers. He saw nothing unusual until he reached the fort's old infirmary. Suddenly, he heard the faint sound of footsteps echoing through the empty halls. Mark followed the sounds, his heart pounding in his chest. The footsteps led him to a room that once served as a medical ward. There, in the dim light, he saw the faint outline of a soldier in a tattered uniform, sitting on a cot and staring out the window. Mark tried to speak to the figure, but it remained silent. He began to record the encounter, describing the scene and the ghostly soldier. As he did, the soldier turned to face him, and Mark felt a chill run down his spine. The soldier's eyes were empty, yet filled with a deep sadness. The ghostly figure slowly stood up and walked toward Mark, who instinctively stepped back. The soldier stopped in front of him and raised his hand, pointing to a corner of the room. Mark shone his flashlight in that direction and discovered a hidden compartment in the wall. Inside the compartment, Mark found a bundle of old letters and a faded photograph of a young woman. The letters reveal that the soldier, named Thomas, had been deeply in love with the woman in the photo. He had died of wounds sustained in battle, never having had the chance to say goodbye to his beloved. Mark realized that Thomas's spirit had been trapped in the fort, unable to rest until his story was known. He carefully collected the letters and the photograph, promising to share Thomas's story with the world. As Mark left the infirmary, he glanced back and saw the ghostly figure of Thomas standing by the window, a faint smile on his face. The fort felt different now, as if a heavy burden had been lifted. Thomas's spirit was finally at peace. The Vanishing Battalion of Verdun. During World War I, in the thick of the Battle of Verdun, a battalion of soldiers was sent on a crucial mission to secure a strategic position. The orders were clear, but the terrain was unforgiving, and the fog that rolled in was thicker than ever before. The battalion, consisting of 300 men, marched into the mist and was never seen again. For years, their disappearance was a mystery. There were no signs of battle, no bodies, no equipment left behind. It was as if they had vanished into thin air. Some believe they had been captured. Others thought they had been swallowed by the earth itself. Decades later, during World War II, a new set of soldiers was stationed in the same region. One night, a young lieutenant named James and his unit heard strange noises coming from the forest. Despite the warnings from the locals, they decided to investigate. As they ventured deeper into the fog, they stumbled upon an old, abandoned trench. Inside, they found remnants of uniforms and equipment from World War I. The insignias matched those of the vanished battalion. James and his men felt an eerie presence and began to hear faint whispers in the air, as if the lost soldiers were trying to communicate. The whispers grew louder, guiding them to a hidden underground bunker. Inside the bunker, they found journals and letters from the lost battalion detailing their final days. The writings reveal that the soldiers had experienced strange phenomena, ghostly apparitions, mysterious lights, and a sense of impending doom. It was clear that something supernatural had befallen them. Just as James was about to leave the bunker, the ghostly figure of a soldier appeared before him. The spirit, with a look of desperation, handed James a final letter addressed to the battalion's families. The apparition then slowly faded away, leaving James and his men in stunned silence. Determined to bring closure to the families, James took the letters and returned to his base. The story of the vanished battalion spread quickly, and the letters were eventually delivered to the descendants of the lost soldiers. The mystery of their disappearance remained unsolved, but their spirits were finally at peace. This tale of the Vanishing Battalion became a legend, reminding everyone of the sacrifices and the unexplained mysteries of war. The Cursed Battlefield. Near a small southern town lies a battlefield from the Civil War, now a historical site visited by tourists and history enthusiasts. However, locals avoid the area at night, claiming it is haunted by the spirits of soldiers who perished in the fierce battle that took place there. A group of soldiers stationed at a nearby military base heard the rumors and decided to investigate. Among them was Sergeant Lisa, a skeptic who didn't believe in ghosts. One night, she and a few of her comrades ventured onto the battlefield with flashlights and cameras, determined to debunk the local legends. As they walked through the tall grass and among the old cannons, they felt an eerie presence. The air was thick with a sense of sorrow and loss. Suddenly, the group heard faint voices and the sound of musket fire. Startled, they scanned the area but saw nothing. Lisa led the group to an old, weathered monument dedicated to the soldiers who had fought and died there. As they stood before the monument, the temperature dropped sharply, and a dance fog began to roll in. Out of the mist, ghostly figures of soldiers began to materialize, their faces etched with pain and fear. One of the apparitions, a young soldier with a blood-stained uniform, approached Lisa. He looked at her with bleeding eyes and whispered, "Help us, Lisa," who had always been practical and unflappable, felt a surge of compassion. She asked the ghost how she could help. The young soldier pointed to a mass grave marked by a simple wooden cross. Lisa and her comrades followed him to the site. The ghost explained that he and his fellow soldiers had been buried without proper rites, and their souls could not find peace. Determined to help, Lisa and her team contacted the local historical society and arranged for a proper ceremony to honor the fallen soldiers. A few days later, a priest conducted a service, and the soldiers were finally laid to rest with the respect they deserved. That night, as Lisa and her comrades stood on the battlefield once more, they saw the ghostly figures of the soldiers appearing one last time. This time their expressions were peaceful, and they slowly faded away into the night, finally free from their earthly torment. Lisa, once a skeptic, now believed in the power of honoring the past. She and her comrades left the battlefield, knowing they had made a difference for the restless spirits of the soldiers who had once fought and died there. The Lighthouse Keeper's Last Stand. On a remote island off the coast of Maine, there stood an old lighthouse known for guiding ships safely through treacherous waters. The lighthouse had been manned by generations of keepers, each dedicated to their duty. But one keeper, in particular, became a legend. His name was Thomas Grayson. Thomas was a solitary man, committed to his work. He had lived in the lighthouse for decades, witnessing countless storms and shipwrecks. But it was the winter of 1920 that marked the most harrowing chapter of his life. A massive storm hit the island, bringing with it waves as high as houses and winds that howl like banshees. On the night of the storm, a ship was caught in the turmoil, its distress signal barely visible through the raging tempest. Thomas knew he had to guide the ship to safety. Battling the fierce winds, Thomas climbed the lighthouse and lit the beacon. But the storm was relentless, and the light alone was not enough. As he looked out over the water, he saw ghostly figures of sailors who had perished in previous shipwrecks. They seemed to beckon him, pointing towards the cliffs. Determined to save the ship, Thomas ventured out into the storm, following the apparitions. He reached the edge of the cliffs and found an old, rusted signal flare. Lighting it, he waved it desperately, creating a second beacon. Miraculously, the ship saw the signal and managed to steer clear of the rocks, finding safe harbor. Exhausted, Thomas returned to the lighthouse, but as he did, he saw the ghostly figures again. This time they were smiling, as if thanking him for his efforts. The next morning, the storm had passed, but Thomas was nowhere to be found. The lighthouse was intact, the beacon still shining, but Thomas had vanished without a trace. Some say he was taken by the spirits of the sailors he had saved, while others believe he simply succumbed to the elements. To this day, the lighthouse is still operational, and on stormy nights, some claim to see the ghostly figure of Thomas Grayson standing at the top, his light guiding ships to safety. The tale of the lighthouse keeper's last stand is a haunting reminder of bravery and the mysteries of the sea. The ghosts of the Eastern Front. During World War II, the Eastern Front was the site of some of the most brutal and devastating battles. One particular area, known as the Forest of the Lost, became infamous among soldiers. It was a dense, dark forest on the border between Germany and the Soviet Union, and many soldiers who entered it never returned. One cold winter night in 1943, a small squad of German soldiers was sent on a reconnaissance mission into the forest. Their orders were to gather intelligence on Soviet troop movements. Among them was a young soldier named Heinrich, who had heard the rumors about the haunted forest, but dismissed them as superstitions. As the squad ventured deeper into the forest, a thick fog began to roll in, obscuring their vision. The trees seemed to close in around them, and the air grew colder. Suddenly, they heard faint whispers and saw flickering lights in the distance. The squad leader ordered them to proceed cautiously, thinking it might be a Soviet patrol. But as they moved closer, the whispers grew louder, and the lights became more erratic. Heinrich felt an overwhelming sense of dread. The men began to see ghostly apparitions of soldiers from both sides, their faces twisted in agony. These spectral figures seemed to be reenacting the horrors of battle, forever trapped in a loop of violence and despair. Terrified, the squad tried to retreat, but the forest seemed to conspire against them. Paths they had taken moments before were now impassable, and the fog grew thicker. One by one, the men began to disappear, swallowed by the forest or taken by the ghostly soldiers. Heinrich found himself alone. Desperately trying to find his way out, he stumbled upon an old, abandoned bunker. Inside, he discovered a journal belonging to a Soviet soldier named Ivan. The journal described how Ivan and his comrades had been caught in a brutal battle in the forest, and how they, too, had encountered the ghostly apparitions. The final entry in Ivan's journal revealed a chilling detail. The forest was cursed. The spirits of the fallen soldiers were bound to the land, reliving their final moments over and over. The only way to escape the curse was to find and destroy a hidden relic, a medallion buried deep within the forest, said to be the source of the curse. Determined to survive, Heinrich set out to find the medallion. Guided by the journal, and the ghostly figures who seemed to want to help him, he ventured deeper into the forest. After hours of searching, he finally found the medallion buried beneath an ancient tree. With trembling hands, Heinrich destroyed the medallion. The forest seemed to exhale a sigh of relief, and the fog began to lift. The ghostly apparitions faded away, and the forest returned to an eerie silence. Heinrich, exhausted but relieved, found his way back to his unit and told them of his harrowing experience. The tale of the haunted forest and the cursed medallion became a legend among soldiers on the Eastern Front. It served as a grim reminder of the horrors of war and the restless spirits left in its wake. The Phantom Plane Squadron. During World War II, in the skies over the Pacific Theater, there was a squadron of American pilots known as the Black Eagles. They were renowned for their bravery and skill in dogfights against the Japanese forces. However, one mission would turn their legacy into a haunting legend. In the summer of 1944, the Black Eagles were tasked with a dangerous mission to intercept a Japanese fleet and prevent them from reaching a strategic Allied base. The squadron, led by Captain Jack Harper, took off from their aircraft carrier at dawn. The skies were clear, and morale was high as they approached the target. A thick bank of clouds suddenly enveloped their planes. Communication was lost, and the pilots struggled to maintain formation. The clouds were unnaturally dark, and strange electrical storms crackled around them. Despite their efforts, the squadron was completely disoriented. When the clouds finally cleared, the Black Eagles found themselves in an unfamiliar part of the Pacific. They were low on fuel and had no choice but to attempt an emergency landing on a small, uncharted island. As they descended, they saw the wreckage of several planes scattered across the island's dense jungle, some of which appeared to be decades old. The pilots managed to land safely, but were stranded with no way to communicate with their carrier. As they explored the island, they discovered that it was not just any island. It was a graveyard of lost aircraft from various eras. The remains of pilots from different wars were scattered among the wreckage. Stranger still, as night fell, the island seemed to come alive with ghostly apparitions of pilots from different nations and periods. These phantoms appeared to be reliving their final moments, trapped in a perpetual cycle of attempting to complete their missions. Captain Harper and his men tried to piece together the mystery of the island. They found an old journal belonging to a World War I pilot, which recounted similar experiences of strange storms and lost squadrons. The journal spoke of an ancient curse placed upon the island by its original inhabitants, who sought to protect it from invaders. Determined to break the curse and escape the island, Harper and his men gathered the journals and relics they found. They performed a ritual described in the journal, hoping to appease the spirits and lift the curse. As they did, the ghostly apparitions began to fade, and a sense of calm settled over the island. At dawn, the pilots heard the sound of a rescue plane. Their carrier had sent out a search party after losing contact with them. Harper and his men were finally rescued, but the island, along with its eerie secrets, remained shrouded in mystery. The story of the Phantom Plane Squadron and the Cursed Island became a legend among pilots and sailors. It served as a chilling reminder of the unknown dangers that lurk in the vast expanse of the Pacific and the restless spirits of those who had been lost to its depths. The ghostly encounter in Normandy. After the grueling battle on the beaches of Normandy, the Allied forces had successfully established a foothold. The blood-stained sands and remnants of fierce combat bore silent testimony to the bravery and sacrifice of thousands. Among the soldiers was Lieutenant Robert Hayes, a young officer from the United States who had just survived one of the most harrowing days of his life. As night fell, the exhausted troop set up camp near the edge of a dense forest that bordered the beach. The men were wary and on edge, knowing that the enemy could be lurking anywhere. Robert volunteered for the night watch, unable to sleep after the adrenaline-fueled day. As Robert patrolled the perimeter, he noticed a faint light flickering deep within the forest. Curious and cautious, he decided to investigate, thinking it might be a signal from enemy scouts. As he ventured deeper into the woods, the light grew brighter, and he heard the faint sound of singing, a hauntingly beautiful melody that seemed to echo through the trees. The light led Robert to a small clearing, where he saw a group of soldiers sitting around a campfire. They wore uniforms that looked old and tattered, and their faces were pale and gaunt. Robert realized with a start that these were not his comrades. The soldiers seemed unaware of his presence, lost in their own world. He stepped closer and listened to their conversation. They spoke in hushed tones about battles long past, their voices filled with sorrow and longing. Robert recognized some of the place names they mentioned. They were battles from World War I. Confused and intrigued, he approached the group, but as he did, one of the soldiers turned to face him. The soldier's eyes were hollow, and his expression was one of deep sadness. "We've been waiting," the ghostly figure said, "waiting for peace that never came." Robert felt a chill run down his spine. He realized he was in the presence of spirits who had been trapped in the forest for decades, unable to find rest. These were soldiers who had fought and died in the previous war, their souls still haunted by the horrors they had experienced. Determined to help, Robert asked the ghostly soldier what he could do. The soldier pointed to an old, overgrown grave at the edge of the clearing. "We were buried without honor," he said. "Lay us to rest properly, and we may finally find peace." The next morning, Robert told his commanding officer about the encounter. Skeptical but willing to support his men, the officer allowed Robert to lead a small group back to the clearing. They carefully excavated the grave and found the remains of several soldiers, along with personal effects that confirmed their identities. With solemn respect, the soldiers held a proper burial ceremony, honoring the fallen with military rites. As they finished, Robert felt a sense of relief wash over him. He looked up and saw the ghostly figures standing at the edge of the clearing, their faces now peaceful. One by one they faded away, their spirits finally at rest. The story of the ghostly encounter and Normandy spread among the troops, becoming a legend that reminded everyone of the cost of war and the importance of honoring those who had sacrificed their lives. For Robert, it was a profound experience that stayed with him long after the war had ended, a reminder of the unseen bonds that connect all soldiers across time.
Thank you for joining us on this journey into the heart of darkness. If you enjoyed this tale, please like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more chilling stories of the unknown.